you very much, Gianfranco. If you'd like to take a seat there, because you are actually one of my panelists. And whilst I take position here, I would like to invite to the stage my other panelists. I have two MEPs. I have Roberta Metsola and Alfred Sant. And I have Kenneth Farrugia from the FIEU and Ian Abdilla for the police. It is interesting that now, after a long time of watching, I finally get to talk about one of the topics that's closest to my heart and to home for me. Have a seat, thank you very much. We are on time, surprisingly, nearly. I will invite the panelists to please be brief and straight to the point, because the topic itself lends to debate. We have a few questions that I've received through Slido throughout the day. If possible, I will try to address them. I'll also keep an eye on Slido, so if I'm checking my phone, it's not because I'm reading Facebook. I'm just trying to address the questions that the audience also has. I will start with the most obvious question that we actually have not really avoided so far, so I'm pleased about that. I would like to have some additional insight, however, from the two MEPs as to the fact that Malta is under scrutiny. It is undeniable. It is not alone in this particular position. Other jurisdictions also are, but Malta undeniably is under scrutiny for financial crime. Much is being said. I would like to hear perhaps from Roberta first what her position on this is.
Thank you for inviting me to address this panel and you today. Talking about what will happen over the next 5 years in the European Parliament's legislature obviously depends on what the priorities of the political groups will be. So I have to start with that disclaimer. I think that if we look back at what has happened and how certain concerns have been addressed, I start by saying that reputation matters. It matters in everything, in how you address an argument, in how you prevent anti-money laundering legislation from being used in order to target small jurisdictions like ours. Using examples or incidents such as terrorist financing mechanisms and the Panama Papers scandal in order to amend legislation and put in through the back door issues and legislative constraints on member states that would, under a different regulatory system, be passed by unanimity. So therefore, Malta over the past years could have, I believe, and this is beyond party politics, but across the board, made sure that certain changes or amendments or introductions into our legislative system could have been done through a different framework so that our relative size in the institutions would not have been taken advantage of. I think that looking forward now, we can try our very best in order to make sure that our exclusive competence in the area of taxation remains. Right? We hear a lot about renewed attempts at introducing enhanced cooperation in this area, and therefore certain member states can go further by even though such cooperation would have disproportionate impact on member states like ours in terms of how you would define the concept of internal market. This is a bit technical, but I think it's important that we mention it. I think we need to do more to ensure that our presence as Malta's members of the European Parliament is better felt in the Economic Affairs Committee. I think that the way we lobby across the political groups, because the landscape has changed, has to be more felt across all groups, because sometimes Maltese MEPs have found themselves not necessarily alone, but without the support of at least two of the bigger groups in the European Parliament. And all this means, back to how I started, that reputation matters. If we can, all of us, go and say, This is how due diligence is practiced. This is how things have been introduced in order to make sure that what happened with Pilatus will not happen again. This is how we're going to make sure that EBA recommendations are not necessarily, let's say, uninvited, but welcomed and taken as a way to improve. This is how we make sure that all questions are answered openly. I think all this can define the rhetoric we use, the vocabulary we use going forward, and I am confident and optimistic that we can do it.
Thank you. And if I'd like to hear from Alfred Sant as well.
Thank you very much. I think 3 points have to be made. First of all, during the last 4 years, there's been unprecedented economic growth in Malta. Over the last 4 years, the economy has grown by 25% plus. And much of that comes from financial services. Now, tourism as well, but financial services account for the bulk of that. Now, even in normal terms, when you have supervisory arrangements, when you have people who monitor what goes on, but promote that, they'll be flooded. And they will have problems catching up. So I think we have had problems catching up with that. But the way I see things, that problem is on the way to being solved. Of course, catching up means then taking care of what could be abuses by way of how people slide in to do things they shouldn't be doing. That's the first point. Second point is this. Financial crime is such a subjective kind of crime. For instance, the EU at the moment would be subject to financial crime under US auspices because it's setting up an SVP to run trade with Iran. That would be counter completely to US jurisdiction. Is that a crime? Of course, under US law, but how about European law? But of course, beyond that then, financial crime is being extended in ways that would not have been envisaged about 30 years back, like aggressive tax planning. Now that's something that's going to become an indicator of a tax haven by European Parliament standards. But there's no legal definition yet of aggressive tax planning. So how do we counter that? How do we discuss that? And the third point then is this. Financial services. What do they stand for? What exactly do they do by way of economic value added? There is value added. But the discussion about that has become blurred. I've been following the taxing parliamentary committee meetings for the last 4 years, 5 years, with a full-time guy just following what happens. And much of the rhetoric and much of the case inputs are really ideologically orientated. Now, I've got nothing against ideology. I'm a Marxist myself. But the point is this. When you're in a neoliberal system and you're talking about financial services as an input into an economic game plan, you have to be scientific about that. What exactly are the rules? And the rules are changing all the time. And they're changing all the time according to ideologically determined principles, which go back to this. The left in the European Parliament, the Greens in the European Parliament, a big section of the populists, and a big section of the populace go for that. Because it's something that's a sugar pill, in political terms, against the austerity policies that they have been following for the last 10 years. So my guess is that we're going to get more of the same in the next 5 years.
Thank you. And actually, there are a couple of points you've just raised, of which I've made a mental note. They, again, very close to my heart, the true understanding of financial crime, what it really means, and the constantly changing regulatory environments are all topics that I would like to address. Before we move on to those, though, I wanted to ask Kenneth, in particular, what exactly has changed in Malta? Because we've heard that there has been scrutiny, there have been reputational concerns, there has been an action plan. I'd like to understand, and I'd like you to explain to the public what exactly has changed and is changing in the regulatory environment and in the legislative environment in Malta in relation to this.
Thank you, Federica. I would like to start because we're taking actions on different fronts. I think at a national level, as the Minister has highlighted already, in April, in the first quarter of 2018, a national strategy for AML and CFT was launched. Through that strategy, there was also the establishment of the National Coordinating Committee, which brings around the table mainly all the stakeholders, all the authorities working in the AML CFT field, including ourselves, the FIU, the police, the Asset Recovery Bureau, the judiciary, and all other authorities, MFSA, MGA, etc. Apart from the National Coordinating Committee is coordinating all the efforts, but there's also an action plan, including 48 key points, which is available online on the Ministry for Finance website. So there are all the actions that each and every authority needs to work on. Work has started mainly on all the action points. Some of them has been concluded, some of them are still ongoing. But that is at a national level. So there's also a drive at a national level to improve throughout all the authorities, because it's not something about the FIU, but it's something about the whole chain, practically. With regards to the FIU, apart from the action plan that it's emanating from the national strategy, as you know, we have been subjected to a review by the EBA on the Pilatus Bank case. It was a lesson learned. We received a number of recommendations, 9 in total. We did not appeal the decision, so we taken on board and we were open for the recommendations. We immediately updated our action plan, because we had an action plan which we were implementing, but as of July 2018, we updated the action plan on the basis of the EBA recommendations, and we started implementing that action plan. Following the EBA, the Commission then issued the formal opinion on the FIU, and we're speaking here on the AML supervision, because the FIU has two roles. So the AML supervision is the AML supervisor in Malta, and then we have the analytical function. So here we're speaking about the AML supervision. Following the formal opinion issued by the Commission, we started also, and we continued working on the action plan. We held 6 weekly update meetings with both the EBA and the Commission on a regular basis. And practically we managed to implement the majority of 138 actions by March 2019. So practically the only few points, some 10 points, which are still ongoing, are of a continuous nature, so like issuing guidance, etc. This was possible through a lot of restructuring to the structure of the FIU in terms of resources. So we have invested also in IT systems, and mainly we have revisited the whole supervisory process. So if we started from the strategy, we reviewed practically the risk assessment, and now we are in a better position to conduct risk-based supervision, because we requested information from subject person, but we're not basing on the risk assessment solely on the information gathered from the subject persons only, but we're basing on 7 different areas, being prudential, information received from the MFSA, MGA. We have information gathered from our analysts, information on the media, information from the SNRA and NRA emanating from those. So we have 7 blocks. We're rating practically the whole sector, and we're targeting then the supervisory examinations accordingly, together with the MFSA and the MGA, because we have 2 teams placed, both one team at the MGA and one team at the MFSA, our plans are to reach mainly 110 officers on compliance. So we're planning around 60 people at the FIU, 30 people at the MFSA, and 20 people at the MFSA and the MGA. Apart from the risk assessment, we also work to improve our supervisory methodology, including policies, procedures, and also how the teams are structured in terms of more specialization. We provided training also, and also we're drafting supervisory plans both on an annual basis but also on a 4-year basis based on cycles according to the risks. Apart from that, we also revisit our enforcement and follow-up procedures in terms of governance. So we enhanced our audit trails, so we maintain full audit trail of how decisions are being taken by the committees. And also, in terms of supervisory actions, we also explored and started the implementation not only of issuing pecuniary fines, but also of instructing subject persons to provide us with action plans, conducting follow-ups, issuing of directives. And as a short-term results, I'm going to be brief because I'm conscious of time. We have already started seeing some results in terms. We have issued, in the last 18 months, the FIU issued some almost 4-point-something million in sanctions. If we compare this amount to 2017, this was 50,000. We have also issued directives to certain subject persons to terminate business relationships. We are also, apart from the work being conducted by the MFSA, MGA and ourselves, and also the awareness, the general awareness, we are also seeing an increase in STR reporting. Yeah. So if we see the STR, although still, we think that it is still underreporting, but if we compare the statistics, for example, last year we received 1,800 STRs. This year, up to May, we received already 980. So we're almost 1,000 STRs. So I think the drive is there. We're not there yet. There's room for improvement.
Absolutely.
But I think with all the actions, the support, the investment, because you need budgets, you need the support also from the Ministry for Finance that we always manage to achieve. I think we will change the everything.
What I take from what you're saying is that essentially financial crime, our collective understanding of financial crime has changed, has evolved quite drastically over the last few years, and therefore the infrastructure, both in terms of the industry but also the government, the institution, has had to adapt with that, and it's a process of learning and changing and investing, as you say. On that same topic, I would like to understand the perspective from the police side as well, as in where do the challenges lie and how does one overcome them?
Yes. As Dr. Sant has said earlier, in these past years we have seen unprecedented growth, particularly with regards to the financial sector, which unfortunately for some time the authorities lagged behind in taking the necessary steps to grow. In my area, we also have seen a shift in the crime, whereas from statistics and from studies that we conduct, we have seen a decrease throughout all levels of crime reported to the police. In the area of financial crime and cybercrime, statistics have shown that it's going up yearly for these past years, and the police are taking the necessary steps to beef up its resources in these mainly two areas. Of course, this seminar deals with digital innovation, money laundering, cryptocurrency. But of course, when we talk about financial crime, it's not only money laundering and cryptocurrency. The Economic Crime Squad within the Malta Police deals with a variety of crimes which some people don't even imagine. So we are in charge of large-scale fraud and misappropriation, protecting the EU financial interests, corruption, protection of intellectual property, anything that has to do with hacking, cyber attacks, anything that involves internet fraud. Just last year alone, the private sector reported fell victim to more than 1.5 million euros in what we call CEO fraud. We support and carry out financial investigations in respect to other crimes that is reported, operations with regard to drug squad, operations involving organized criminality, and then we particular areas like funding of terrorism, together with FIAU and other government agencies, we are in charge of investigating these sanctions, as the previous speaker was saying. And in the past years, we have also seen a large increase in requests from foreign authorities. So whereas in the past we used to have very few requests for mutual legal assistance, nowadays these requests have multiplied to more than 10 weekly.
So there is
taking
an increased awareness globally
of our resources. Of course, in this area, the police are increasing their resources. So we have, as similar to other agencies, we have prepared a plan, a full restructuring plan that would see the squad increase in number from the 36 we were last year to 100 next year, including for the first time the employment of civilians with us. We have, at the moment, we have 2 financial analysts full-time. This year we will be employing another 2, next year another 2. Moving to new quarters in order to meet these new challenges. Again, the results are showing. So we have beefed up our money laundering squad, and the work that they have done in this last year alone is more than the work that has been carried out in the previous 5 years. So that is the scale of what we are doing and the challenges we have to face.
Thank you, and very much in keeping, I suspect, with a global change and a global change of gear in terms of how much pressure there is now to understand and to investigate and unravel financial crime. On that topic, I wanted to ask Gianfranco now, sort of an external perspective, because we have heard from individuals who live and breathe Malta on every single day. I'd like to understand, first of all, what's the perspective globally, which you sort of have covered, but also to understand what do financial institutions are doing wrong?
Well, I don't think that there is that much difference, right? I mean, I think in most territories we see an increase of cases because the awareness just increased. And I mean, I agree to a great extent to what you said. I mean, obviously it's politically driven and there are certain forces that influence regulation. Some territories are more powerful, and I mean, we can have different views, especially about the US. Reality is we can't change it, right? It is what it is. I mean, we have seen the first big fine in the Netherlands against ING of 755 million. No other European jurisdiction ever, gave such a sanction. My personal view is Europe for a long time only did lip service, right? Especially in terms of sanctions. Would the EU have fined a financial institutions for violating sanctions, the US would not have imposed these huge fines against European banks. Right? So EU politicians always say, oh yes, we have the same sanctions list, but nothing happens. So lip service. So yeah, I know many people perceive the US as the world police and all that, and I tend to agree a bit, but don't forget, they find their own financial institutions in the same way, right? Our news or our media doesn't report that, but they do exactly the same with their own financial institutions. And that's really the biggest risk. What is coming from the US at the end of the day? Yeah. And still, they have the power of the US dollar where you can cut you off the financial system. And we don't have that power, nobody else have it. So we need to live with it if we like it or we don't.
There was one particular, thank you. There was also one particular question that has definitely been coming throughout the day, and I want to make sure I address it at least in the last 5 minutes. Possibly I'll be directing it towards Kenneth and Roberta. there is an overwhelming sense that banks are being pushed to embrace technology, embrace change, embrace innovation, but at the same time, they absolutely do not have the skills, the capacity to perform checks, enhance due diligence in a way that protects the financial services. What's your view on the topic?
Well, I think this is something that we all have to address, and the poll reflected not only what we believe people think, but also what we consider our knowledge to be. And that is something that we all have to embrace, understand, and have the courage to overcome. The European Commission at the moment, for example, is undergoing the same analysis. Do we legislate in an area that we still don't understand fully what it is about? Do we risk that and then be told by the industry that a law cannot be implemented or it will have a disproportionate effect in inhibiting the growth of a sector? At the same time, as legislators, do we ask for certain regulations to be placed on the table, but make sure that that regulation does not in any way prevent individuals from growing? I think it's a question that we all have to ask. We have made mistakes in the past. If I look, or at least, let me rephrase the word mistake, but we have understood that certain legislative frameworks, I'll refer to the General Data Protection Regulation. When we looked at it and you look at the impact of it on a country like ours, on the disproportionate effect that has on our micro enterprises, are we prepared as a country to say we need to push back on over-regulation where that regulation is going to have a disproportionate impact on small jurisdictions like ours? And there we have a big challenge over the next 5 years, because the tendency is to regulate at no matter what cost. Now, of course, at the same time, non-regulation will create a vacuum, and that risks a few individuals with rogue intentions to crowd out the majority that do not have those intentions. But where does the balance lie? And there, whether you are a political representative, whether you are an expert in the field, whether you are drafting the legislative framework, we need to take and be aware of our lack of understanding at the beginning of where this legislation could get us once it's put into place.
Thank you very much. Kenneth, on a closing note, because I suspect you see it on a day-to-day basis, what do we do? Do we force banks to take customers on board, or do we get them to get better at doing due diligence?
I think it's all about risk, so the risk appetite. It is very important that institutions have the controls in place. So with regards to regulation, I think the ever-changing regulations are not helping. So even from our end, sometimes we're seeing AMLD 4, 5, 6. Now we're speaking about AMLD 7. So it's changing so rapidly. So we're not giving time that even the control processes, etc., are in place and are effectively being operated. So we cannot just force banks to onboard clients. However, what we are doing is that we're providing guidance. We're providing sectorial guidance now. We're getting continuous outreach with not only the banks but all the sectors. We're trying to cater to provide more support, more guidance, more training, because it's heavily needed. So it's not just issuing sanctions, because sanctions sometimes a bank can pay a sanction and can proceed with its own you know. So it's, I think what we need to do is to engage more, to understand, to help, and to support, because, and this is also part of the National AML CFT strategy, that we establish private-public partnership, because we want to take on board the respective sectors, to work with them in order to ensure that we have a good, a solid regulatory controls in place throughout the whole system. So we can filter and we can take immediate action on particular individuals that are abusing from the system.
Very much. So what I would like to do is I would like to thank you all very much. I would be happy to stay here all afternoon and evening and talk about the particular topic, but I suspect that the entire audience here is seeing a pint of beer in me. So on that note, I thank you very much, and I will let you get off the stage before I spend a few words by way of closing remarks.